Good afternoon from London, but good evening, I believe, where you guys are, or at least where most of you are. My name, if you have only just arrived to this session, my name is Ben Dolbear. I'm the Senior Pastoral Director at Cats College London. I'm also a teacher of economics, and today we're going to talk about economics, and specifically how it is that the global economy, so not just one individual country, but actually the entire world, has been affected by the coronavirus, or COVID-19, C19, the various ways in which it's being termed. So prior to joining this lesson, you were given this blurb about what we're going to cover. And there was a key word, the word redundant, within this paragraph that you were asked to think about and consider, and we'll come back to that in a short while. Before we do though, we're talking about the economy and economics, and actually what I'm aware of is that many of you are 15, 16 years old and perhaps don't necessarily know a great deal about economics at this point. So what I've done is I've just thrown together a few words associated with economics. So poverty, trade, output, employment, and government spending. These are just some of the different areas of economics. And I want us to consider, how has the virus, how has C19 affected the world economy in relation to these different variables? Before we start doing this, it's probably worth ensuring that we understand what these words and what these terms actually mean. I wonder, I'm not sure what the English level is like amongst you, but if I were just to say somebody's name, perhaps one of our agents or MDMs, if you'd be able to tell us what one of these words mean. I'm just conscious of, I don't want to spend the whole time talking at you. It'd be great if we got some others involved here. So is anybody willing to volunteer and explain what the word poverty means? What about Yulia? No? Ara?
Poverty means poor.
Hi, Ara.
Hello. Financially not affordable.
Say again?
Financially not affordable. Probably poverty. Yeah.
Okay, so you use the word poor. So struggling financially to obtain the money that's needed to survive, potentially. So maybe not even having enough money to pay for basic things like food or shelter or fresh water. Okay, what about trade? What is trade? Anyone? I'm happy for people just to start talking. What about Dan Petrov?
Wait,
No?
that you purchase something or you sell something.
Between who?
Between people or company.
And where are those people or companies based?
The market.
Are they in the same country?
They can be in different countries.
Yeah, they can be in the same country, they can be in different countries.
On the earth.
But if we think about the global economy, and we're talking about trade, then we're probably considering more so trade between different countries. And that would have been affected, of course, by the virus, the goods and services flowing between different countries. Output, this word output, I've just noticed that some of you are writing things in the chat, which is actually probably better, because I can see there's about 72 of us all in this room. And like I said at the start, it'd be really good, rather than me talking at everyone, for some contributions. So if anyone thinks they know what this word output means, then you can type it in the chat, or you can shout out. Either is fine. Like selling, yeah, okay. So selling what? Exactly, products. So products or goods and services that are sold. Output is important because the more products that are being produced, the bigger the economy. Yeah, exactly. Production, making goods, this is all great, yeah. And somebody's used the word GDP, which is only going to be something you've come across if you've done economics before. But it certainly is, yeah, the output is the quantity of goods and services produced across a country, or maybe in the entire world. So what's going to happen to output as a result of COVID-19? And then employment, what about that one? Thank you, Nick and Maria. Yeah, having a job, hiring people, people having jobs or having work. Of course, we're assuming that they want to work, but those that actually want to work and have the ability to work and then have a job are employed. And the number of people with a job and in employment will be affected by C-19. Good, lots of contributions. Now we're using the chat. Thank you, guys. And then finally, government spending is probably quite self-explanatory. The amount of money that a government, whether it's the UK government, the Chinese government, the US state, how much money they are spending on public services. So just spend a moment deciding with each of these 5 things, what will happen to them as a result of C-19, COVID-19? Will they go up or down? And on the next slide, I'll show you the answers. So I'll just give you a moment. Okay. So this is what I've got. I don't know if you guys can see my chat on the screen. I'm just going to move it down there out of the way. So this is what I've got. Trade is likely to go down. Output likely to go down. Employment, so people in work going down. Poverty up. Government spending up. Hopefully, we all agree with that, given the impact of the virus.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Shouldn't the government spending go down?
Why would it go down?
Why does it go up?
Okay. The reason that it will go up is because governments are now having to pay money to those that are without a job. Now, what I'm assuming, and this is an important point actually, I'm assuming that an economy or a government pays unemployment benefits. Now, benefits, which is essentially a amount of money paid every week by the government to those unemployed people so they have money to pay for things that they need. So these two things, employment and government spending, are related to one another, because as employment goes down, government spending will go up. However, I take your point, government spending might go down if, for example, in a different economy, there are no unemployment benefits and the taxation received by government is falling, and therefore they don't have the money to spend. Good. Right, now the reason that the employment is highlighted here is because we're going to focus on employment and on jobs throughout this session. But I thought it was important for us to start really by getting a sense of what is the global economy. Okay, let's move this down. Okay, so what does this word redundant mean when we're talking about jobs? You may have already done a little bit of research on this, because this was the question that was asked prior to this demo lesson. The answer to that is this. So redundancy is when an employer, so a company, a business, they reduce their workforce because a job, or perhaps more than one job, is no longer required. Interesting, Fiona, it's not the same as being fired, because if you're fired from a job, it's often because you are not performing well enough, and therefore you may be replaced. You may be fired or sacked, and then someone else is hired to do that job. But redundant means it's no longer needed. So a job may no longer be needed if the size of the company is shrinking, if there is no longer enough work to go around, and perhaps two people are doing a job that could be done by just one person. So a little exercise for you. I've got different jobs, or different images of people doing different jobs. Just for clarity, the top left are hospital workers. The top right is a Starbucks worker. The bottom right are construction workers, so builders. And then the bottom left, as it says on his t-shirt, is someone working in a gym, a personal trainer. So the question is, how have these workers been affected by the coronavirus? So I'm going to just give you a few minutes to think about this. And you can jot something down if you want to. Think and bear in mind that we just talked about and defined redundancy. And then in a few minutes, we'll go through the impact on these workers. I'm not sure who's writing on the screen, but if you could refrain from doing that, that would be great. Right. I'm going to move on to the next slide. What you'll notice here is that I've got different words in different for each image. You might agree or disagree. The medical staff, these members of staff are likely to become busier. So they certainly aren't going to be made redundant. They are needed and required. actually it might be the case that we need more doctors and nurses and other people working in this kind of environment. Did anybody say something different about that? No? Actually, in the UK, it's quite interesting because we've drafted in people or previous doctors and nurses that have retired. We've drafted them in to come and work again to support the NHS. So doctors and nurses that are older, 70, 75 years old, that have retired are coming back into work to support the NHS, which is overburdened. The next one, the Starbucks worker. Since most countries have actually closed business activity and leisure industries like coffee shops, restaurants, bars, cinemas, gyms, all these sorts of things, we would expect the Starbucks worker to be potentially made redundant. Got lots of interesting comments here, which I shall come back to in a moment, because there's so many of us. Trying to keep on top of this is a challenge. Restaurants probably going to be redundant. Yeah, exactly. So restaurants, bars, coffee shops, we're likely to see redundancies. The builders, now I saw an interesting comment up here about, so Irina, apologies if I say anybody's name incorrectly, thinks that building will be more in demand. And then we're down here, Ara's saying construction work may be stopped. I put no change, question mark, because actually a lot of building work, now it may be different in your own countries, but a lot of building work in the UK is continuing. So perhaps there's been no change. Some building sites may have stopped. And the reason for that is social distancing and the question of, is it necessary to travel to work to do this job? Why might construction work be more in demand, Irina? I wonder what your point is. Okay. Build hospital. Okay, interesting. Perhaps that could be the case. I wonder if building hospitals, maybe if that were to increase, would be more significant than, say, the fall in construction work in other areas. That's the question. So it's an interesting one. The final image is of the personal trainer, and I put redundant question mark here because whilst we can't go to the gym because gyms are closed, a personal trainer could be quite innovative and try and do what we're doing right now. They could try and be online and offer a personal training program through some sort of web sharing video conferencing platform, potentially. Depends how much demand there is for that service. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would ask again, for those of you that have, I'm sure it was accidental, but if you've scribbled over your screen, if you could remove that, it'd be great. Now, this is an interesting question. We're saying that Starbucks workers are potentially redundant. They no longer are needed because the shops are closed. People aren't using that service. And we've said that hospitals are in high demand. So can we use those Starbucks workers in our hospitals? Can we move workers from doing one thing where there is no demand for them to doing another thing where there is a demand for it? Now, I'll just wait a minute and let you think about that. And you're more than welcome to throw a comment in the chat if you want, before I'll talk about it. Excellent. So many comments. Thank you for all your contributions. It's great that you're getting involved. I was worried that I was just going to spend the entire time just talking at you, but to see the comments, hopefully you've all got the Zoom group chat up on your screen as well, so you can see the contributions made by others, because there are some interesting suggestions. And the answer is not a straightforward one. Now, whether or not we can use those Starbucks workers in a hospital will depend on the job that we're talking about. And some of you have picked up on that. If we're talking about nurses and doctors, then of course not. I think I read that somebody said, of course not, because they don't have the skills or the experience to do that job. It's just out of the question. And that's why the UK government has asked those that have retired to re-enter the workforce, because they do have the skills and the experience. There are some jobs though in a hospital, perhaps cleaning, and again others have said this, cleaning or delivering, or even in the post room, preparing food for people. These kind of less skilled jobs, they could actually move those workers from doing one thing in Starbucks, another thing in a hospital. The key thing here though is that labour, so workers, they are not perfectly mobile. We can't just move people from doing one thing to doing another. That we can't solve redundancy issues in this way because of skills, experience and knowledge that is required. So I think we've already said this really, but it's worth highlighting given the task that we're going to do next after this, where we start to consider different economies and how they've responded to COVID-19. Where is it that the demand for a worker comes from? Where does the demand for teachers come from? And nurses and those Starbucks workers? You know, where does the demand actually come from those workers? And the answer to that is actually, it comes from businesses. The demand for any particular worker is derived from the demand for the particular product or activity. Students demand an education. A school provides an education and therefore will demand teachers in order to provide it. So when business activity starts to fall, which is what we've seen across the world, of course, those businesses no longer need workers. Perhaps they no longer need their entire workforce or just part of their workforce. The point is though, unemployment, people without a job, is going to be affected and we're going to see big increases in it. So how does the government respond? Oh, bear with me a minute. Okay, just hold on one sec, everyone. Got a slight issue. So the UK government and what they have done to try and combat the unemployment. This word, furlough, many people in the UK had not heard of this word until about a month or so ago, when the UK government introduced the furlough scheme. So a furlough is a leave of absence where an employer, so a business, says to the worker, you can be absent for a period of time. It may or may not be paid. And after that period of time, you come back and do your job as usual. So what the UK government is doing is saying to businesses, look, if you haven't got the money to pay for wages, rather than making that employee redundant and therefore them losing their job, we will give you the money to pay the worker for a period of time. And that period of time will be reviewed on a regular basis. Now, at the moment, it's up until the end of June. It was just extended. It may be that it extends further to the end of July or even the end of August. So what that means is that your Starbucks workers now, for example, they haven't in the UK been made redundant. Instead, they've been put on furlough. They're being paid, not in full, but a significant proportion of their salary is being paid for as long as this scheme is in place. And then when the scheme is over, businesses should be back and open, and therefore they can start paying their workers themselves again. So this is the scheme. What are the implications for business? So I've put this positive and negative table in there, and the answers were already there in my previous version. I must have had the wrong version up. So I want you to just think about this question for a few moments, and then we'll take some contributions. What are the good and the bad things about the UK's approach to redundancy? Okay, some good suggestions coming through. It's also interesting to hear different perspectives from different countries. Anastasia, you've said, how can they get that wage? In Russia, it's practically unreal. What do you mean by that?
Yes, hello. So the question is that you see in Russia, you should fulfill lots of forms to get this money, which should be paid while you are unemployed, while you are waiting for your current job. But I'm interested in how it's in UK. So your employer gives you this wage, or you should, for example, go to some governmental body and to get it somewhere. So I mean the way of getting this money.
Yeah, that was clear. Thank you. Actually, the government have tried to make it really easy for people, and they put the burden on the businesses, and they've said to businesses, you continue to pay the workers, and then we will reimburse you with the money. So actually the workers don't need to do anything. The businesses are the ones having to do the work and then claim the money back from the government. The only issue with that is that the government won't start giving the money to the worker, to the businesses immediately. There's going to be a little bit of a time lag. And of course, if you're a business that has cash flow problems now, then you might even struggle to survive until you receive that payment from government. But most businesses are sensible enough to have some reserves, so they've got enough cash to keep them going for a little bit.
Okay, thank you for your answer. In Russia, the same, but still lots of businesses, they have no this cash, which can be helpful for people. So people should live without money because business can't afford this stuff. Even government told it to do it.
Right. Yeah, I guess they're very different economies, aren't they? And they're handling it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so government is going to spend a lot of money, and that, I think that's the key thing. The key negative point is the government. This is going to cost the government an absolute fortune. And the UK government, after the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, embarked on a huge program to try and reduce the size of government debt. And it has been relatively successful in doing that. However, now it's going to find itself accumulating more and more national debt. And there are huge problems associated with that. Russia has to spend its money on other things. From Dan, yeah, there are other things that all governments will need to spend their money on, and trying to decide where that money is spent is always a difficult economic decision. And the key advantage, thank you, Dari, is that people don't lose their jobs. That's absolutely critical. And that hopefully when we come out the other side of this, those people can return to work, having, yes, cost the government a huge amount of money, but allowing for activity to continue. Excellent point from Tim about what's the implication on taxes. Will we see an increase in tax? If the government are borrowing more, then they're going to have to pay that back in the form of debt repayments. Prevent crime, that's interesting. Yeah, I like that one. Like the social effects of people not having jobs. It's the best policy among the world. Okay, thank you, Perry. We'll pass that on to Boris Johnson, who has recovered and should be back in the limelight soon, which is good for us. Yeah, and also just the fact that people won't worry about things so much, because it does create a huge amount of stress and anxiety. Okay, good. Thank you for those contributions. We'll move on to the next country, the United States. What an interesting one. Lots and lots in the news about the United States and their handling of the coronavirus. I'll avoid talking too politically about their handling of it. We'll focus, well, okay, USA or the US, either or. What are they doing over there? Well, the United States generally is more what we call free market. They don't like government intervention and government interference. It's very much about liberty and freedom of speech and all these sorts of principles. So there's less government involvement. So businesses are having to make workers redundant. And it's all over the news and the press about how the level of unemployment in the US is huge. Lots and lots of people are being made redundant and are now without work. And there are, of course, implications there. So again, same exercise as before. I don't know if you can see the chat on my screen, but if you can, I've just brought it down to the bottom to kind of hide it, to give you a little bit of time to write some comments and have a think and contribute, and then we'll just run through them again. Okay. Oh, thank you, Juan, for letting me know that you can't see my chat box. Oh, that's actually useful to know. I can keep it in my view. Okay, so I'm starting to get some contributions through. So Timmy is saying unrest, news of protests. Absolutely, we've seen that plastered all over the news. It's really interesting, actually, that people are protesting against the lockdown. Again, I really want to avoid becoming too political, but it's just very curious that this country has been affected significantly in comparison to others by the virus, yet many individuals are choosing to protest against being locked down. There you go. So obviously, of course, says Dan, people are going to lose their jobs. Yeah, people will lose their jobs. And if they lose their jobs, they'll need to go and ask the government for unemployment benefits, which do exist in the US. So this government spending is also going to increase. So there's an interesting point about government debt. It's certainly true that there will not be as much government debt as there would be in, say, the UK, where you've got the furlough scheme. But there still could be debt if the government is spending a huge amount of money on unemployment benefits. People may become homeless. There's already a huge gap between the rich and the poor in the United States. There is not as much support for poorer people. Reduce the taxes for business owners. Yes, that could happen. Government credibility will decline. Now that's interesting, because this is where the boundary between politics and economics gets a bit blurred, because if the government's credibility is affected, that might have a knock-on effect on stock markets. It might also have an effect on trade, one of the economic variables we talked about right at the start. It might discourage other countries from trading with them if they think that the government isn't stable. The strong will survive, yeah. Lots of, I can't read all of these, but I will flick through. So, yeah, people are not actually going to buy things because they don't have the money to do so. And that's going to affect demand, and actually it's going to perpetuate unemployment. And this is, yeah, Amazon. I was listening to the news only this morning, actually, about another big American brand, well, American company that's done very, very well out of COVID-19. Anybody know, apart from Amazon, what company that might be? eBay, possibly. But yeah, the streaming services is what I'm talking about. Netflix have seen an absolutely huge increase in the number of users. So they've done well out of it, although they can't make any more films or any more programs. So that's going to limit their ability to produce new content. Hopefully this is only a short-term thing. Lots and lots of contributions. Thank you again, all of you, for making suggestions. YouTube as well, yeah. Yeah, Zoom. Zoom's an interesting one, actually. It's absolutely exploded, although there have been some questions over security around Zoom. Actually, Zoom is paid in order for us, with Zoom, like many packages, there's a freebie version which gives you the basics, but if you want the better version, which CATS actually does, we have to pay for our subscription so that we get longer time to deliver and that sort of thing. Okay, let's move on and consider another country, one not in the West, but actually in the East, Vietnam. Vietnam is an interesting country to compare because it's right next to China, but is very different from China and also the countries we've looked at so far with the US and the UK. It's different because the political system is communist officially. As well as that, it's also much, much poorer and doesn't have the same resources as the US and the UK. What the government has said it's going to try and do is reduce tax rates and other fees that are paid to the government to try and help people. So that's what the Vietnamese government have said. Does anybody know how Vietnam has approached the lockdown? I mean, is there anyone from Vietnam with us? Ah, okay. So would one of you like to tell us how it's been handled? So Lynn, for example, would you be able to tell us? Oh, we can't hear you. What about Van? Okay, no problem. The lockdown was just applied about a few weeks ago. Okay. Now, this will be interesting. This will be an exercise for all of us in the extent to which the news is manipulated for specific regions of the world. The UK, or what we're hearing in the UK, is that Vietnam went into lockdown quickly and went into a full, strict lockdown, meaning that people could do very little but stay in their homes. And they also closed all the borders, so that would prevent people coming in and out. It's actually been seen as a success story over here in the West, because what we've seen in Vietnam is 0 deaths. Again, please tell me if this is not correct, our Vietnamese friends, because this is what we're hearing. We're hearing that there's been no deaths and very few cases of the coronavirus in Vietnam, a country bordering China. Okay, good. At least we've got that right. At least we're not getting fake news about that. So that's how they've handled it. They've gone, now think about the implications of that economically. They've gone on full lockdown. Again, I'm just going to pause for a few moments while you gather your thoughts, and you can write some contributions in the chat about what good and bad things might result from this government policy. They're going to reduce tax rates and fees. Okay. I'll start looking at contributions, but please do continue to make them. Less cash for the government, of course. If they're cutting taxes, where's their revenue going to go? That's not a good thing. More cash possibly for everyone else because they're not having to pay as much tax, which could be good. Timmy has said about there being no job protection, which is really important. Even if you're cutting income tax for your workers, if they're losing their jobs, what good is it to them to be paying less tax because they're not earning any money? The airlines are being heavily affected by it, especially the national carrier, but also all of those working in the airline industry. Again, less money for the government. And besides the economic impact, the societal impact is that people are actually surviving. And hopefully come the other side of this, there'll be policies in place to address the mass unemployment that may result. Government. The government's going to see a reduction in revenue to spend on healthcare. I think it's important to recognise that the reason that Vietnam have had to respond like this is because they don't have the same standard of healthcare as more developed countries. So if things had gotten how they have in the UK or the US, the impact would have been much worse. In Uzbekistan, if you leave home for no reason, you'll be fined. Yes. That's interesting. We're seeing that in the UK as well. If you are seen out in a group of people, you can be fined. You have to have permits. It's the same in Italy and Spain. You have to have a permit to leave, to go to the shop. That's really quite stringent. We're not doing that in the UK. We're not having permits. Good. Okay. So you can see that there are also positives and negatives from this government policy, but of course the government can only work within the confines of its resources. Okay, I just want to share, because time is getting on now. I just want to share a few headlines from the UK with you related to unemployment. So the first one is from The Guardian, a well-known UK newspaper. So unemployment in Britain and the US could surpass the levels reached during the Great Depression. So in the 1930s, the Great Depression caused mass unemployment across the world. And this is coming from the former Bank of England official. And you can see in the second paragraph, UK unemployment could rapidly rise to 6 million, 21% of the workforce, but in the US, 32% of the workforce. Now, these are projections, but those forget about the numbers, because of course the population sizes are hugely different. But if you look at the percentages, the proportions, you can see that we're expecting the US to do worse, to be more affected. And that's because of the approach that they have taken. But could they have afforded to take the same approach as the UK? On Vietnam, this is from the Diplomat, the economic impact on Vietnam is likely to be significant and growing. So despite the fact they've actually handled the whole thing well, it's going to have a big impact on their economy. Vietnam is likely to lose 0.41% of GDP, even though they still want to aim for economic growth. Okay, a final thought really, and there's no right or wrong answer, and really I guess even the experts in this area don't have the answers to these questions. It's very much an opinion. But if you were the leader of a country, of a nation, how would you respond to the fall in demand for workers? Now, I mean, you might want to think about your own country and the resources that you have, because of course, is it fair to compare the UK and Vietnam, where the UK is able to respond in the way that it has, but Vietnam wouldn't be? So nonetheless, what do you think is the best way to respond to this crisis? Or is there actually a different way that we haven't considered that could be used to address this redundancy? So these questions are just things for you to think about and not necessarily answer right now, but I would urge you to consider them and discuss them after this session. So if you're a student, if I'm talking to you as a student, then what I'd really like you to do is think about these questions and then go and talk about them with your mum, your dad, your uncle, your auntie, your granddad, whoever you are living with. You've just learnt something about what's going on in the world economically. So go and tell them about it, and then have this discussion about what it is you could do as a nation to address this problem. And if this is interesting to you, if you think, yeah, okay, I've really found it interesting considering the economic impact of COVID-19, then economics is something you should consider studying as part of your progression when you start a new course in September. And hopefully it will be one of our CATS colleges where you come and study economics as part of a package of other subjects that would complement it. It's nice to hear that we're getting complimentary comments about the UK. I personally feel as if the government has done a good job with the furlough scheme. Perhaps it didn't respond quick enough, but it certainly has done a good job on the economic front.